Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over potential tropical storm Josephine, which is currently now Invest 95L. It has a 90% chance of developing within the next 2 days and the next 5 days, so a very high chance that this will at least be a tropical depression, and I would say about 70% of the model guidance that we're seeing is bringing this to a tropical storm, which would again bring it to Tropical Storm Josephine, which would be our next named storm. So let's get right into it here with your National Weather Service page. Now also something I just want to point out, I will be making my official graphical forecast, so my cone of uncertainty forecast and my intensity guidance forecast tomorrow or the day after. So in the next couple of videos, you'll be seeing my personal graphics for the storm, so that you guys can get a better handle on what is likely to happen with this storm. So here's the National Weather Service page. We have red flag warnings in effect for some fire weather danger in for parts of the northern and central Rockies, as well as parts of the Northwest. Now, we also have some excessive heat warnings and watches in effect for parts of Southern California and Arizona, and also some heat advisories for parts of southwestern Texas and southernmost parts of New Mexico, and then also a little area there for Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. We also have a larger area which is up for the northeast there in parts of New England, and also for the northeast. And then we also just have some excess flash flood warnings and watches. That's because of a really strong derecho that actually moved through. It started off in parts of Iowa, and then it kind of just intensified and grew further and kind of intensified kind of this wide. And I was watching on radar yesterday, and it was actually very, very impressive how it stuck together all the way until it hit basically Indiana and Michigan. That's when it started to break apart, but it really stayed together all the way from parts of Iowa and Minnesota, and it just went southeastward. And you actually had a moderate risk of severe weather yesterday. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to cover that because I had my fall forecast scheduled, but definitely if you did experience severe weather yesterday, let me know in the comments down below. Now, here is the current 5-day graphical outlook from the National Hurricane Center, and they put this as again as a 90% chance over the next 5 days and the next 48 hours as well. And you can kind of see the general direction they think this is going to move in. They think it's going to move further west, and I would agree with them. They have it within the next 5 days moving further west until it hits until it's a couple hundred miles east of the Lesser Antilles. By that point, that's when the 5-day forecast kind of stops there. Now, here is the current Eastern Pacific and what they are showing with the Eastern Pacific, and it is actually very, very active, and that's something you don't like to see with developing, if you want developing storms in the Atlantic. If you have a very, very active Eastern Pacific, especially throughout this region, that's when you start to really get a lot of shear, mainly in the Atlantic, and that really doesn't help the storms develop. So usually you want a very quiet Eastern Pacific, which we have seen. We're only up to the E named storm in the Eastern Pacific, which is actually kind of crazy how inactive this season has been, and that's actually made the Atlantic season very, very active up to this point. We have two areas of high chance of developing and another area of moderate chance of developing right behind those two systems. So we do have a very, very active area. We have Hurricane Alita right there, and currently it's a high in Category 1, maybe could touch Category 2 status, but then briefly or very quickly it will actually move down into a Category 1 again, and then tropical storm. Now, here is currently where Invest 95L is currently located. It's located at about 11.3 degrees north by 38.2 degrees west, and it currently has maximum sustained winds of about 30 knots and gusts to about 40 knots there, and a minimum central pressure of about 1,007 millibars. Now, last night when I checked this, it was at about 1,009 millibars, so it is starting to strengthen a little bit more, and it has actually gotten a little bit more convection, especially on the northern side as we've moved throughout the day yesterday and also into this morning. And it also has gone up in its wind speeds. I believe yesterday it was at about 20 knots sustained winds. Now it's at about 30 knots sustained winds. So it is starting to grow, and it's only 5 knots away from being, or 4 knots away, I believe, from being a tropical storm. Now, Here is your model track guidance. Most of these models actually bring this. Yesterday we were kind of confused on whether, or we were kind of having to deal with whether this will move south of Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, or whether it move north of there. Now we've moved to pretty much all the models moving north of there, and north of the Caribbean actually has more favorable conditions, just because you're not gonna have that chance that it moves over a landmass too quickly. So it'll actually have more chances to develop, and also it'll impact much less land area, so a lot less people will be affected, hopefully, and hopefully this stays correct. It will most likely be a tropical storm by the point it hits that 120-hour mark, when most of these models have it impacting, or at least nearing, parts of Puerto Rico and the Lesser Antilles there. But it does look like it's still going to be a weak tropical storm, and maybe you'll just get some gusty winds and some potential flooding, but it should be out of there within the next day or so, and it should be already moving northward. And it's not too big of a system; it's not a huge system, so it's not going to impact a lot of a very wide area. So that's a good thing with the system. Now, here is your GFS ensemble models, your American models, and they bring this pretty much the same track, but they go actually a little bit farther, and they bring this around a big ridge that is currently sitting out in the Atlantic. Now, also something that I want to point out, we are going to have this very, very profound trough that's just going to be sitting over the eastern United States by this point. A lot of the models actually show that the real question is whether is how deep that trough is. That'll bring cold air or colder air to the eastern United States, and that'll actually lead a kind of a tunnel for the system, kind of like Isaias did. It'll have a good tunnel to kind of move straight up the east coast. That would only happen if this were to move further west, and in turn, if the high pressure system did move further west, and also the troughing would actually have to time out with the storm. So there's a lot of pieces that have to come together, but I just want to notify you guys that we might have another storm move up the east coast. It's not looking likely right now, but it's definitely not off the table just yet. We were looking at the same thing with ECS, where it was looking like it was actually going to stay offshore, and then quickly all the models shifted westward. So that's something that we'll have to deal with as we get closer to that. That's still about 7 to 9 days out, so quite a ways out. Now, here is your current Canadian ensemble model guidance, and this one's a little bit more scattered all over the place. And they bring this, again, pretty much the same track, but we do have a couple more outliers that bring this either into the Bahamas, or some bring this a lot further to the east. Now, let's start talking about your intensity guidance, and we have almost all the models except for, I believe, one model, that orange model, the AEMI model, that brings this. All the rest of those models bring this to either a tropical storm, or one of the models brings this to a category 1. I'm not sure how likely that is currently. Right now, most of the models bring this to a low-end tropical storm or a middle-level tropical storm, but we still have room for that to change, whether this guidance goes down a little bit, or whether it increases the wind speeds. We'll have to see as time goes on. Now, here is some of the environmental conditions that are really going to help the storm grow. Now, something that's on its side is the sea surface temperatures. We have very, very warm sea surface temperatures over this area, and generally, Invest 95L is kind of off to the right of the screen, so you can't really see it on this picture, so it would be somewhere further to the right from here, but you can tell the general area it's going to be tracking in. It's tracking in very, very warm waters. So these are waters that are right around anywhere from 86 to about 91 or 92 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is very, very warm water that will really help this system grow. And if you actually want to know what the sea surface temperature anomalies are, you see those are also well above average for the entire region that this will be tracking through, all the way from the Gulf of Mexico to the Caribbean to parts of the main development region and off the east coast as well. We have extremely warm sea surface temperatures throughout that region. Now, let's start talking about your Nino 3.4 index. Now, what is this? And it's basically what this is basically just showing you whether we have colder than normal or warmer than normal sea surface temperatures over the Nino region. So that's basically the region off of South America, and if we have colder than normal conditions or a La Nina pattern throughout that region, usually that means for the summertime we have some lesser wind shear throughout the Atlantic, and we do have a weak La Nina that is developing. It's at about 0.5 degree 0.5 degrees Celsius below normal. So that is decently below normal. That'll lead to a little bit less wind shear for the storm to go through. Now let's start talking about your actual wind shear numbers, and we do have some decent wind shear, which would be ahead of the storm. By this time, this is at about 36 hours ahead right now, but we would have some decent wind shear ahead of the storm right in here. So this would have to fight this wind shear. If this takes a slightly further south track, kind of like this, it would miss the brunt of this very intense wind shear, which would be right around here. So we'll have to see this if this system, which Isaias also did, if you remember, it went through a big area of wind shear and it still developed into a hurricane. If we can see that again, I feel like the storm could actually do that, and it could go through this wind shear and probably reform over those extremely warm temperatures over the Atlantic that we currently have, and that'll really help the storm develop. Now, here is your Saharan dust layer, and we do have a little bit of that, but this storm is really, it's kind of a little bit deceptive, but we kind of have this storm right around in here. I'll do it in different colors, right around here, and this storm is kind of bringing in with it some Saharan dust. It's kind of dragging some of this dust further to the west. So not all of that is dust that it's interacting with, but this dust is really hindering the system because it's getting in between the system. We're gonna end up having some drier air in kind of go through the system, and that can actually really weaken a system. Luckily, it's not too dry air, so it's not that bad of Saharan dust, and storms like this can actually handle a decent amount of dust before it'll really fall apart. But that is something that would kind of weaken or hinder this system. And then finally, here's your humidity, and this would be at 66 hours out, so your system would be right around here by this point, and you're seeing a big kind of arm of decently dry air that is just kind of going south and westward right in front of the storm, and that would actually weaken the system quite a bit if this were to interact with it. We'll have to see how quickly this can actually move throughout that dry air, and if it does, we have very decent humidity levels all throughout the western Atlantic. So if it can move through there, it could definitely strengthen again as it moves throughout just east of the east coast there. So it would be offshore most likely, and most likely it could actually intensify if it were to battle some of the very weak Saharan dust that we have, some decent wind shear that we have, and also some fairly dry air that we have right in front of it. But we also have those extremely warm sea surface temperatures that will actually help it develop. So if it can go through that, which is basically all those things are kind of timing out at the same time, so they're all pretty much within this region: the wind shear, the dry air, and also the Saharan dust. If this storm can actually just move through that, it pretty much has a very favorable environment once it passes that area of very extremely unfavorable air. So this storm definitely has a lot of room to grow, and we still have a lot to decipher with it. So I'll be keeping you updated. Most likely another update on this tomorrow. So make sure you are subscribed and you have your notifications on so you don't miss that. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.